how do you find harmony if the path is continuously changing?
Yeah, great question. Tony Robbins has a quote that says, change is inevitable, progress isn't. That doesn't mean that we automatically are always making progress in our own life. Tony Robbins' first mentor, Jim Rohn, if you guys know Jim Rohn. And Jim had a great concept around intentionality and planning that you might have heard before, but basically this says every day deserves 15 minutes. Every week deserves an hour. Every month deserves 2 to 3 hours. Every quarter deserves a half a day. And every year deserves a retreat, like a getaway to plan. And so that has been pretty fundamental or foundational to how I plan, how I live my life. And in doing so, even as things are changing, I'm consistently evaluating what is priority right now. What is intention for me right now?
Welcome to the Spear and Clover podcast, the show where military mindset meets the spirit of the puppy. I'm your host, Jason Skisick, the entrepreneurial evangelist, and each week I bring you the stories of visionaries who see the world as it could be and can't help but take action. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and review. This is the best way to stay in the loop when we drop new content. Don't forget, the conversation continues in our brand new Spear and Clover community group. Check us out on Discord or follow the link in our bios to join this free group for entrepreneurs or wantrepreneurs. Hey, entrepreneurs, does any of this sound familiar? Have you hired only A players, purchased the latest fire plays from so-called gurus, consistently almost become an elite organization, only to have it result in talented employees regressing to mediocrity, tactical plays spiking performance and then fading away quickly, managers losing discipline and hunger and then either leaving or just coasting? Do you really think the difference between you and the industry-leading team is a hire or a slick new marketing play? That's the same tired crap my Chicago Bears have shoved down my throat for over 30 years. Meanwhile, the Green Bay Packers have had two coaches in 50 years, they've had two quarterbacks for 20 years, and they're a contender every single year. Many leaders buy the best playbooks, draft the best talent, and hire the best coaches, and year after year return without trophies. Who could blame them? Most business coaches, consultants, and so-called gurus only sell tactical playbooks designed to provide a brief spike followed by a return to business as usual. The truth is, winning is simple. You need a clear North Star supported by managers and role players that have absolutely zero uncertainty about how they can help the team win today. Our simple program helps you become a dynasty organization from top to bottom. Dynasty Defined not only helps you structure a team that's capable of consistently winning championships, but once you do, they'll be writing their own playbooks, recruiting the best talent, and calling their own plays from the field. The choice is yours. Continue to hope that the next hire or brand new marketing play will finally solve all your problems, or commit to winning permanently, roll up your sleeves, and let's get started defining your dynasty. I am beyond proud to announce that we are now accepting applications for Dynasty Defined. Cohorts are limited to 6 entrepreneurs, and they fill up quickly, so head on over to www.spearandclover.com now and claim your spot. I can't wait to see you on the inside. In general, human beings are fascinated by those of us who are very successful. This is not big news. There have been books, movies, documentaries, and God knows many podcasts dedicated to trying to understand what makes some people massively successful while others can't seem to get out of their own way. I personally think that this may be rooted in finding effective systems to get through life and sticking to them across all areas of our life. You hear stories of a mythical man who not only has $7 million businesses, he also has a thriving health coaching practice and changes the lives of many. Oh, and he wins over a dozen national championships in martial arts, and he's a loving father and husband and super friendly. This guy can't be real, right? And if he is, he must have some pretty huge secrets, right? Well, he's here today as our guest, so we can ask him. Please welcome my friend, Michael Chu. Michael, how are you, brother?
I'm doing outstanding, man. Jason, thanks for the intro and thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you, man. I was looking at your profile, and the reason I wrote that intro that way is I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. Wow, this is pretty amazing. Wow,
Yeah.
I just kept going through. And so I guess the obvious question is, how do you balance all of the different elements of your life and do so as successfully as you have?
Phew. I mean, as I heard you share that intro, um, and I think you said something along the lines of, can this person be real? Is this person human? I'm always very quick when I think about when I hear the accolades or I hear the achievements. I'm always very quick to go back to the journey. To
Yeah.
me, that's always been my favorite part. Whether it was growing up, pretty middle class, whether it was being pretty shy or insecure through most of my teens and 20s, and so as I hear some of those accolades and I hear some of the achievements, my favorite part is the failures, the adversities, the challenges, the lessons along the way, which I'm sure we might get to some of those throughout the conversation. But
Sure.
how do I balance all those things? I was in my 20s asking myself a similar question, and I was growing my first business. We were getting to a couple six figures, but I had some traction and momentum and could take it to the next level. But I also wanted to move to Hawaii. So like
Ah,
the young 20-year-old in me wanted to escape to Hawaii, but also wanted to make money. And two very pivotal, I guess, principles or lessons were presented to me and taught to me at that phase. And that was number one, I had a coach who asked me, why are you asking or versus and? And he talked about the tyranny of or versus the expansion of and. And he said, what if you ask the question, how do I grow and create a thriving business here in New Jersey and create the lifestyle that I want in Hawaii? Now, this was 2008, 2009. So people weren't on Zoom, people weren't on work at home businesses and everything like that. It was a very like show up to the office type of business.
mhm.
But that simple question created a curiosity for me on how would I have to structure my business in such a way that I could disappear to Hawaii for 2, 3+ weeks at a time, multiple times a year, and the business would still grow to seven figures and thrive sustainably without me. So that was the first one. And then number two, I read a book by Matthew Kelly called Off Balance.
Mm.
And he essentially, throughout the book, debunks the myth of trying to live a life on balance.
Mhm.
He talks about creating harmony instead. He talks about how being off balance is actually one of the biggest keys to fulfillment and happiness, right? If you look at some of the most fulfilled, highest achieving human beings, they have seasons of their year or seasons of their life where they're wildly off balance. Use football as an analogy earlier, right? So whether it's like two-a-days during OTAs leading up to the season, you're wildly off balance for a couple of months of the year, but then able to travel the world making millions other parts of the year. So I stopped
Sure.
chasing balance and I started committing to the expansion of and how do I do this and this? How do I have great health and a great business, a great relationship and great health? And I started asking myself, how do I create harmony amongst those things in a way that fulfills me?
And so, how do you find harmony if the path is continuously changing?
Yeah, great question. So for me, there's a handful of things that I could dive into there. The fact that things are constantly changing. Tony Robbins has a quote that says, change is inevitable,
Mhm.
progress isn't.
Mhm.
Right? So things are always changing. That doesn't mean that we automatically are always making progress in our own life. So if you were to go back to, Tony Robbins's first mentor, Jim Rohn, if you guys know Jim Rohn, and Jim had a great concept around intentionality and planning that you might have heard before, but basically this says every day deserves 15 minutes. Every week deserves an hour. Every month deserves 2 to 3 hours. Every quarter deserves a half a day, and every year deserves a retreat, like a getaway to plan.
Mm.
And so that has been pretty fundamental or foundational to how I plan, how I live my life. And in doing so, even as things are changing, I'm consistently evaluating what is priority right now, what is intention for me right now. And then
Mm.
after that, I adjust and make progress to what's important in this season based on a concept that I call standard over schedule.
Mm.
Um, and that concept essentially is no matter what's going on with my schedule, what are the minimum standards in a certain area of my life that I want to hit? So many of us in the entrepreneur world are always thinking big, big, big 10x rule, right? But the reality is, if we had minimal or lower limit targets just as much as we had upper limit targets, most of us would actually create more in our lives if we just never let ourselves fall below certain minimums over a long period of time. And so those minimum standards, hence standard over schedule, allows me to lay the foundation for harmony in my life, no matter how crazy things are. As an example, I'd love to work out 6 days a week, but my minimum by Sunday night that I rarely fall below is 3. And so having minimums like that are really impactful. I'd love, right, to get present, playful time with my daughters, right, every single day. But my minimum is 4 times a week. I get like present time with my family. Right. And so when I have those minimums in place, it helps me create harmony no matter what's going on with the schedule, no matter how much is changing. Even if I'm traveling, it's like, how can I make sure I get on FaceTime with my girls to make sure I get some present time, even while I'm traveling, to hit those minimum standards. So the two things is the Jim Rohn concept of consistently, intentionally looking ahead at your schedule, looking ahead at what's going on in your life. Because like you said, things are constantly changing. But then Jason, knowing what those minimums are to standard over schedule has been crucial for me in creating the life that, at least for me, that brings me joy and brings me fulfillment.
I can see that it does, man. And I think that was a really excellent way to paint that picture. I would say also that we share that in common. I schedule my time first with those non-negotiables with my family and with my training time and with my personal self-care stuff as well. We've talked about that before on the show, so I won't go into too much depth there. Talk to me about what it was like coming up as a young martial arts champion and how that has informed the way you live your life now.
Yeah. I'm going to answer one thing based on the last thing we were just saying.
Sure, of course.
Just a thought that I had, then I'm going to answer that question. I was running a seminar for business. I was doing business coaching on one side of my company, and people were asking, how do you plan out your year? And I think this was surprising to people. I said, number one, the first thing I plan out, guys, take a guess. What's the first thing I plan out for the year? And they're like, your sales meetings, you're this, that, and the other, whatever, right? I said the first thing throughout all of my 20s that I plan out when I'm doing my annual planning is I just go on a Google hunt for all of the outdoor country concerts, all of the UFC events, the New York Giants home games, and I find all the events that I would want to go to. And I start putting those in my calendar first, and then I plan the rest of my business and everything around my fun and my fulfillment. And I think that always surprised people, but that's how I make sure, based on the primacy effect, that I'm putting the things that are important to me first. And so I just wanted to share that based on something you had just said.
We have that in common as well, by the way. That's really great. I love that you shared that. And that's not something that I've talked about a lot, but I'm already booked for a couple of things next year, pretty late in the year. And
exactly.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, like we're just looking at some comedy shows that we're looking at in the start of the year and things like that. But
you're about to have all the comedy shows down in Austin, right? That's where Rogan's mothership's opening up.
Yeah. Him and Chappelle have been doing a bunch of shows down here. And, it's the mothership in Austin for sure right now.
Yeah.
But growing up as a martial artist, so I started karate when I was 3. And how that's played into the way I like how I live my life today. And I love how you said like the militant mindset, but the heart of a puppy, or however you put that. That's been a journey that I've been on, because I would go as far as to say I'd been too militant for quite some time, like very serious. And over the last couple of years, doing a lot of somatic healing and trauma work, I've returned back to my heart, I guess is the best way I could describe it. And has allowed joy and playfulness. But the things that have served me from the growing up as a martial artist, when I got into business and how that played out, I was actually super shy. And so getting into entrepreneurship was not something I'd ever thought I would do. Almost my entire family are teachers. So that's kind of just the world that I grew up in, like get a job, stable income, go to school, et cetera, and things like that. So even the idea of entrepreneurship, was never something that I thought I would get into, nonetheless thrive in. But as I have got into businesses over the last 2 decades, I find myself leaning back a lot of times on some of those early martial arts upbringing years, and some of the big ones being things like humility. That there's always someone in business that's working harder, trying to beat you, and right. And so during my highest highs, we were an Inc. 5000 fastest growing company in America last year, or $1 million month. And like, despite all the accolades, one thing I fall back on is humility. Who do I need to continue to become? How can I continue to grow? That's always been important. Consistency, right? The Bruce Lee quote of I'd rather fear a man who's done one kick 10,000 times than 10,000 kicks one time. Yeah. You know, business, like true sustainable business, is actually quite boring. The internet has made entrepreneurship, gurus, you use the word gurus. Yeah. Gurus have made entrepreneurship sometimes look sexier than maybe it really is, with the rewards, the cars and the planes and the travel and the money and the watches and all that type of stuff, which is cool, but it's a flash in the pan. It's a temporary pleasure for a moment. Entrepreneurship behind the scenes, 98% of the time, is boring. It's a grind. It's the same thing repeated consistently within a system. And so I think that's been a huge fundamental piece from martial arts and how I show up in business, because I have no problem doing the boring work over and over again. I wanted to quit karate thousands of times between 13 years old and 23 years old when I got to my teens, and you know, and friends are drinking, partying, going out, doing all the fun things. And here I am. I started karate when I was 3. So by the time I was 13, it's already been a decade. Here I am doing the same damn kick 35 times to start off class, or 100 times throughout the class, or whatever it is. But in hindsight, looking back on it, that's what develops mastery. That's what separates the great from the good. And you use the analogy of the Bears and the Packers, right? The Packers, 2 coaches, two quarterbacks in 20 years, like you said. There's a level of consistency that leads to greatness. So yeah, I could go on and on about that.
I know you could. I know you could. We have a lot in of shared ideas here. Sure. I've never been a national champion of anything, but I will tell you, I've watched great athletes in many different ways, in person and behind the scenes, of, you know, the world-class weightlifter. You watch them show up to the gym every single day and they do the exact same thing. They sit at the same spot. They slide the little box out. It's got their wrist wraps in there. It's got their shoes in there, their dusty 20-year-old shoes in there. And they have their little notebook that has every lift that they've ever made. And then people at large see somebody walk out onto a platform and lift some monumental amount of weight and make it look easy. And, you know, where you see Kobe Bryant sink that game-winning shot that he took 1,000 times yesterday, right? And I think it's just easy for people to think that the extremity or the flash is somehow the important thing, when really it's the core, it's the habit and the system that I think ultimately builds it, right? And I think it's just so great to have somebody like you here today. And I mean, to the extent where even Michael's books have been arranged the right way, right? Like he's here. I told him before the call, him and Dustin Bogle are the only 2 people I know who've done that. And both of you are successful business owners who manage businesses, thriving businesses remotely. And so that's super interesting to me. Well, so because you're coming from a path of, you know, a long line of teachers and also the discipline of martial arts, how did you give yourself permission to become an entrepreneur? And what was that itch that you just couldn't scratch until you did?
I sucked at it. That's the simple answer. Yeah. I was used to being really good at things most of my life. School came pretty naturally. I started karate, I'll say it again, when I was 3. And so by the time I was competing, I mean, that stuff was wired in me. Mm-hmm. I had to work hard for both things. Don't get me wrong. I learned work ethic and everything like that. But in general, they came pretty naturally. They came. And then I got into business. I got into sales. My first experience into sales, I was 19 years old. I was working at Pizza Hut to make what I call beer and gas money. And the beer and gas money wasn't getting provided for working at Pizza Hut. I came home from college, and Pizza Hut was giving me 4 to 8 hours a week. That wasn't going to pay the bills. So I landed out of a newspaper, my very first direct sales job, and I stunk at it. Like, it was hard. It made me uncomfortable. And and in some weird way I'm wired, I guess. I was like, that's exactly why I have to figure this out. It inspired me. It made me want to get good at it. It became a skill I wanted to learn and get good at. I realized I was shy. I realized I was a perfectionist. In sales, you have to deal with what? Rejection and not being perfect. You're not going to read off a perfect script. And so the fact that I sucked at it was my initial answer to you, I think is what inspired me and challenged me. Now, as I got going, I then saw a vision for myself. I saw a vision to impact people. I saw a type of industry that would have a higher ceiling on income, and that motivated me. I saw a lifestyle that could be very much like being an athlete, right? That I could pour myself into, I could give my all to, and I think that's how I got hooked, and that's how it kept me going. I stunk at it is what hooked me, and then the vision of who I could become is what kept me going. Mm-hmm. And then over the years, the last piece I'll say to that, going back to the martial arts question though, I saw a quote recently that said something like, poor people think a red Ferrari, a big house, and a yacht are going to make them happy. Rich people see those things as a simple reminder of who they've had to become to get those things. And going back to my karate and martial arts, and now training Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, like, you know, all the martial arts. I remember I was winning a bunch of trophies. You know, I was like 4 foot, I was 4'11" my freshman year of high school, trying to make the varsity basketball team. So I was actually quite short at first, and I spiked up 9 inches in the next year or two. Yeah. But I share that because I remember my instructor came up to me to talk to me about humility. And they said the trophy, even when I would win, they would ask, did you really win? And what they were referring to is that they would say the trophy is not the piece of metal that's going to collect dust in your garage, which is so true. The trophy, and then they would put their hand on my heart here, even as an 11-year-old, as a 14-year-old, as a 16-year-old, that was probably more profound than I really understood in the moment. They said, the trophy is here, right? That's what the process is going to develop. Do you remember in your heart that you gave your best? Do you remember in your body who you had to become to win the trophy? There are times where I came in second and my instructors felt like I won because of the process and how I gave my best. There's times where I won and they were not satisfied. Like, we didn't feel like you gave your best performance. They didn't feel like, so I think that's what's kept me going, is who I can become through entrepreneurship when it challenges me.
That's beautiful, man. And so you're coming from martial arts. You kind of already answered this, but I want to dig a little deeper here. You come from martial arts, which is primarily an individual sport, and you've now built businesses. Being an entrepreneur requires being a leader that people want to follow, that people can learn from, that people can have conflict with and still want to do those things with. And so for me personally, the things that I do every day are a result of me and my life and what I've learned. The way that I lead, though, I can kind of point to the 3 or 4 or 5 people in my life that led me that I think of when I think of leadership. Sure. How have you transferred into becoming a leader of others? Because that's such a foundational part of what you've been doing. And it's not easy for someone who's been hyper successful, way ahead of the pack in some ways. So talk to me about how you became a leader.
I think growing up around a lot of teachers was a perfect pairing when I got into entrepreneurship, to also wanting to build an organization, not just be an independent sales rep or something like that during one of my first jobs. And so that first business that I was doing, you start off as a sales rep, but as you progress and you grow, the advancement opportunity at that company in particular was the opportunity to then build your own team and organization where you recruit, hire, train, and develop other people to do the sales position that you just got good at. And so that is what then introduced me. So the sales role itself introduced me to entrepreneurship, but then it was the opportunity to build my own organization that introduced me to leadership. And that's when I don't know if I've ever been asked this exact question before. I always get asked how I got into entrepreneurship, but when I really, so this is allowing me to really reflect. I love this. That's when I really fell in love with business. I can't say I loved sales. I didn't fall in love with sales, but building an organization and being able to lead, inspire, and influence others, that's when I fell in love with business, because it became about we, not me. It became about it became about John Maxwell is the first leadership guru that I became obsessed with during that season of where I wanted to learn leadership. And in the number one law in the 21-year field of laws of leadership that is like fundamental to everything he teaches is the law of the lid. If you're only a 6 as a human being, you can't lead 9s and 10s. You can only lead 3, 4s, and 5s. And so if you want to lead an inspiring organization, it starts with how you lead yourself. Do you develop yourself to a 10 so you can lead 8s and you can inspire A players? You used the word A players earlier. If you're a D player, and in your integrity, your character, your skills, your knowledge, the likelihood you'll attract, retain, and develop A players is not very likely. And so to answer your question, the opportunity to build an organization is what introduced me to leadership. And I fell in love with what leadership is because it's about other people.
When you build a team, as someone who has been, and I don't mean to keep tooting your horn here, but you're objectively successful in like measured ways over a long period of time. And so when you go out and try to identify lone wolves to add to the pack, how do you know when it's going to be a good fit? And have you been successful at that in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I'm not great at everything in business. I'm good at some things, and then I hire where I'm good. So I stink at some things. But you asked, have I been successful at that? If there's one thing that has been a core foundation of how I've built 5 different 7-figure organizations over the years, it's been the ability to systemize attracting key players, training and developing them. Just as a real example, right? 5 years ago, when I started this current coaching business, this online course business, Ashley is her name. She started off as my EA, right? My executive assistant. Today, she leads my entire operations and HR department 5 years later, right?
Yeah.
So I could give you dozens of examples like that. I was just the best man in a wedding for a guy named Josh, who was one of my very first sales reps in 2007.
Wow.
And here we are 15 years later, right? He has advanced through my organizations and we've built a long-term relationship. He's still a client of one of my businesses today, 15 years later. And I was, so like that long-term relationship and being able to retain huge. How is what I believe in, what I call character over credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Character over credentials. Some people like to replace the word character with culture over credentials. Is this person the right character fit? And so almost all of my interviewing vetting process is to vet and try and reveal the person's actual character. These days, especially virtually, most people are professional interviewers. They can put on a really good act for 60 minutes. But I want to read between the lines. I want to ask questions about their real life, the results they do or don't have in their life, and start to reveal their actual character. And so my whole interview process is designed to essentially only do 2 things: reveal their character and see if they can actually solve the problem that I'm hiring them for. All the other stuff is fluff. It's like 10% of the interview process, your resume and where you went to school and all that other type of stuff. Can you solve the problem we're hiring you for? And character-wise, are you the type of person I want to surround myself with? And culturally, are you the type of person that I can see myself building this organization with? Because the last, Jason, principle I go about when I hire people is if I couldn't see myself working with you for a decade, I'm not even going to consider working with you for a day.
Couldn't agree more.
So if you take all those things in place, I think you can learn how to make systematically really good hires that end up building organizations with you long-term, because one of the most costly time and financial things for a business is bad hires.
I agree. And so we'll linger on it for one more little note because I want to get a little deeper there. There are people that have great character who would not succeed in Michael Chu's organizations. Are you a core values guy? How do you how much internal work, especially earlier in your career? Because I want to go to the more recent stuff soon here. But earlier in your career, before the somatic work, before you looked internally maybe as much, how were you able to find folks that not just were good characters but also potentially core value fits? How much work did you do there? And maybe if you could speak a little to that.
I think the core values have evolved as I've evolved as a human being. Okay. But for the most part, I'd have to go back 15, 20 years. almost as early as I remember hiring, yes, I've been a core values, principles, mission type of person, and whether you read the book Scaling Up or Traction or what, it doesn't matter. Like, core values are not something that you put on a poster and then you hang in a middle school hallway, right? That
You're
says
selling my course
teamwork,
for me.
right?
Yeah.
That doesn't say teamwork or whatever. Core values are what you live, the people live. It becomes what you tolerate, like you don't allow. And so, to answer your question, yes, core values have always been a part of that. And I'll share two things to that really quickly. One of the most impactful books for me around that principle. Yes, I love Scaling Up, and yes, I love Traction, all that stuff. But actually, the most impactful book around that I first read was Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh. And he talks about the growth of Zappos. And he talks about how he built Zappos on the foundation of culture and core values, to go as far as their interview process, right? Humility is one of like their core values. You would get picked up by a taxi driver when you landed for an interview of like a senior level role, right? To you, it just looks like a taxi. A yellow cab just came to pick you up. Yeah. And they drive you to the headquarters and blah, 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 and they drop you off. What you didn't know along the way is that the taxi driver was actually an employee of the company, and they were evaluating right off the bat. Do you say hello? Do you say, how are you? Do you say thank you? Is there humility, right? During the interview process, purposely, one of the senior executives will say, sorry, I just got a call. I have to step out for a second. I'm going to have my assistant step in and ask you a couple other questions. And they evaluate, do you treat the assistant differently because they're in a lower level role, right? And I'll never forget, after reading the book, I called to buy a pair of shoes on Cyber Monday.
Yeah.
And I had just read the book and I thought it was amazing, but there was that part of my brain, like, do they really live these cultural values?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I was on the phone talking to a phone sales rep trying to buy a pair of shoes. And you hear these noisemakers in the background, and the sales rep says, hold on one second. Puts me on hold in the middle of trying to buy a pair of shoes on Cyber Monday, their busiest day, comes back and goes, hey, sorry, our managers just wanted us all to take a shot of tequila because we just broke our Cyber Monday sales record. Wow. And one of their core values is fun with a little weirdness. I might not be saying it exactly, but fun with a little weirdness. And they live that out. And so that's the first thing, is that book was highly pivotal for me in understanding core values. And then for me, I try and make it always easy for me to remember what those core values are, because if I can't remember them and live them, how is it going to show up in interviews, et cetera? So like, for example, one of my companies right now, the way I remember if you're a core value fit for us is if you're a champ. It's aligned with champion and all that type of stuff. But if you're not C, coachable, and you think you know it all, not a fit for us. We just know it off the bat, no matter how. H, you're humble and you're honest. You're not going to sugarcoat stuff, right? Because when people sugarcoat results and blah, blah, you get the point. A, you're an action taker. You want to move with speed. You want to get things done. M, you're mission focused, not just paycheck focused. You're bought into the mission of where we're going. And P, you're passionate about personal growth. You understand that evolution in life is a byproduct of how you want to keep growing yourself. And we'll ask questions aligned with those 5 core values to evaluate if someone is a fit or is not a fit to be a part of our organization. So that was a longer-winded answer, but hopefully that addresses the question that you'd asked.
Yeah, it definitely does. And what I would say, first of all, as soon as you started talking about it, I am familiar with the Zappos story now that you say that, and that is a brilliant example. The other thing I would say is I think it's nice when I get on a call with somebody for one of these podcasts and I go down an avenue that they clearly weren't prepared to talk about, and it just fits so perfectly with who they represent themselves as. And so if you're listening to this at home, I think Mike's the real thing, right? Like Michael is the real deal, buddy. Because it's so interesting to watch you walk down that hallway off to the side and it still looks the way that it should. And it makes me feel like if you followed the principles that Michael is talking about, you could also do many of the things that he's been able to accomplish, right? I think that's the brilliance of entrepreneurship. Self-employed is when you're the guy. Entrepreneurship is when the system is the guy, right? I want to change gears though, because I am someone, and I've talked about this publicly, where I was born with spirit of the puppy. Some people call that ADD. I choose to call it spirit of the puppy or entrepreneur's disease. And then I went to the military. I went to the army to gain what I call military mindset. I think you're the inverse. It sounds to me like you were brought up, or at least raised, in this very structured and focused way. And then you talk about, doing some somatic work and other things on yourself to sort of add, we'll borrow my phrase of spirit of the puppy, but happiness and whatever your words are for it. So for starters, for the listeners at home, what is somatic work? What does that mean? And then secondly, tell us what it's like to gain that as an adult.
Yeah. I'm not a somatic expert. It's just had a transformational impact on my life. From my understanding of it, there's like talk therapy, where you're talking through the problems, and it's a lot of staying in your head. But somatic therapy is getting into your heart and your nervous system. It's kind of the whole concept of like the mind forgets. My daughter just brought me a smoothie.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you, baby. I know you said we could edit it and everything.
We don't even have to. I think that shows who you are, Michael. I love it. Yeah.
So to the somatic part, I think there's a lot of talk stuff. And for the first 20, 30 years of my life, it was all about how much I know and knowledge. And I've done Tony Robbins this and John Maxwell this. Somatic is getting into the heart and the nervous system and the body, because from my understanding and my experience of this over the last 5 years now, two things I've found to be true. And that is the mind forgets, but the body like remembers. And so you could be acting a certain way and then you get triggered, and all of a sudden you're cursing, yelling, scared, shutting, right? No matter how much you've developed yourself. And I've done all this personal growth work, and yet I could find myself in a fight with a significant other saying stuff that I wouldn't be proud, right, of the man I was striving to be. Like, why was that happening?
Yeah.
Right. And so here I was in a 30-year-old body reverting back to a 3-year-old body. That's somatic, is your nervous system and your body. And so it's like, why we as human beings violate what we say we value, right? Tony Robbins says we'll violate our values to meet our needs. And so if we don't learn to develop our ability to love ourselves and the emotional side, our needs will be childhood level needs. Even though we've grown ourselves into a millionaire in our 40s or whatever it is, that's somatic work. It's your nervous system response. It's your childhood trauma. It's those things.
And are you doing breath work, fire and ice, sauna, ice bath? What are you into?
Yeah. So I like, as you could kind of in my own nature, as you get to know me, like once I decide I want to check something out, I'm like, I'm gonna fully immerse myself in all this stuff. So to answer your question, yeah, I've done all those things: breath work and tapping, child reparenting, Wim Hof breath work, psilocybin, if we can say that here on these calls, right?
Oh yeah, I got a neon mushroom right there, buddy.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Right. So yes, all the things. Yeah. Actually, to be fair, I'm sure there's stuff I don't even know. So to say all the things, no. But yes, I've dove into a lot of different things. For me, the most foundational has been just consistent somatic therapy, consistent somatic work that involves a lot of the different tapping and reparenting. Because somatic therapy or somatic coaching has been game changing for me.
I got to send you to meet my friend Delphin Ward. Owns a place called The Generator in Austin, and they do a ton of really cool stuff like what you're describing.
Generator Athlete Lab.
Yeah,
I love that place.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, that's Delphin and his wife. I don't know her name. I haven't met her yet, but
cool. I'd love to meet the owners, but I do love that place.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Amazing. And so talk to me about how that has changed you now as a person. So, because I agree, I think I always say that there's 3 levels to maturing as a human being and understanding yourself. And I describe it as being in traffic, right? The one level is you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off and you get angry and you do all of the things like you talked about, like you're a 3-year-old all of a sudden in your body. Yeah. And then you get to a point where you're like, nah, that's silly. And so somebody cuts you off, you get really tense, you get really tight, and then your mind takes over and your mind now knows, hey, this is body, chill out. This is not something that, and then you smile and you wave and they drive away. And then I think the 3rd level is that body awareness of just, it happens. And then you smile because you and that person now have a great story to tell their family when they get home from work, and you just go about your day. And so what has changed as an entrepreneur for you since these changes have happened in your personal life?
Yeah. Well, you said something earlier, Jason. You said, I can tell that Michael is the real deal. And that meant a lot to me when you said that, because A, in the podcast, online, internet world that I live in, it's easy to look one way on the outside and be completely different behind the scenes. One of the things that, why that compliment meant a lot to me is over the last 3 to 5 years, two things have been important to me: that there is full integrity and alignment with who I say I am and who I actually am. And then a phrase that I've been saying a lot over the last year or two is that my life is better off of social media than it even looks like on social media. Whereas I don't think that's always the case. I think most people, they make their life look better on social media than it actually is. There's things in my life that never show up. My life outside of social media is so much deeper, fulfilling, rewarding, more joyful and life on social media even looks pretty good for me already, and it's even better off. And so I start with that because you started with my accolades at the start of this conversation, and I kind of responded with, when I hear that, I appreciate it, but I go back to the failures and the challenges. This is how somatic work has played into my journey as an entrepreneur. I built at that point 2 different 7-figure organizations, and I was about to turn 30. I was having all types of thoughts about what it would mean to turn 30. I think we have our own explorations at certain decades. And for me, I was a 30-year-old on the outside, but I was still a little boy emotionally on the inside. And here I am with success on the outside: national championships, 7-figure businesses. I was one of the youngest promotions to an executive role at my first company, bought a house at these age. So I could go on and on about the accolades.
Yeah.
And yet here I found myself miserable, I guess is the best way to describe it. Not believing my best days were ahead of me, believing my best days were behind me, on the verge of a divorce in a relationship that I knew I was never meant to be in. I had lost a lot of my net worth just chasing more wealth, like kind of just selfishly. And I found myself on a bathroom floor on a Tuesday, unwilling to even get myself to go to the office, which, as you pointed out earlier, is weird for me because I grew up in a world of structure and discipline, and I can just get things done. That's just who I am. And here I was on the bathroom floor, crippled with anxiety, crying, unfulfilled and unable to go to the office. And so there was this 2 to 3 year really dark phase of my life as I was turning 30. And that's when I started to get introduced to a lot of the somatic work in the early parts of my 30s. And so how that played out for me as an entrepreneur is it brought me back into my heart. So if I'm using your analogies, I was all militant up until that point. It allowed me to bring the playful puppy side back and learning to love myself. It went to a couple deep parts. If you're cool with me elaborating, because I think this will be impactful.
Yeah, of course.
When we're able, my experience, not saying this is everybody's, but when we're able to identify what, I hate even using the word trauma, because I think people can use that word and turn it into just like a victim story.
Yep.
I use the word trauma as a place of, let's explore what's not serving you. Let's explore what happened to you. And you created either a mental or an emotional story about that that is not serving your greatest life, not serving your destiny. And for me, it was 2 things. I grew up in a household of an alcoholic. And so I feared the abandonment of love, right? My dad might physically be there, but he might go from sober to buzzed and emotionally disconnect. And so my deepest fear was the abandonment of love, to the point where I would people please, to the point where I would violate my own boundaries, to the point where I would lie, omit truths just to look good or to look a certain way because I wanted to be accepted and loved. And how that went deeper, though, funny enough, that there's my dad. And then yet, whose love was I actually craving and wanting the most? And so I was questioning all the time, is my dad proud of me? Does my dad love me? Does my mom love me? Right. And it all led to a conversation of, am I ever actually going to be good enough? And that's the biggest thing that doing that type of work has led to for me, is that when you're not, that can be great fuel at certain times of our life. Let me just share that. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. But oftentimes Tony Robbins says success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. When we're chasing success, hoping that it'll meet the need of love, meet the need of, right, my dad's proud of me now, we start to realize that those things are never actually going to meet those needs. And for me, what I started to notice is the goalpost kept moving. Mm-hmm. And so if anyone's listening to this, you might relate to this. You finally achieve, you succeed, and yet the goalpost moves. Maybe I'll feel happy now when I'm worth $10 million, not 2, not 5. Right? Maybe I'll be happy when I have 5, 7 figures. Maybe I'll be happy. That's when I started to just believe like my best days are behind me, because what's the point of any of this? Mm-hmm. And I learned to, through somatic work, I learned to, most importantly, not crave just the love of others, but most importantly, learn how to unconditionally love myself. I know that sounds kind of woo-woo, which to me, it was very woo-woo growing up in a very militant type of world, Asian household. You don't talk about your feelings and all these things. But how it's allowed me to lead and actually hear the concerns of my team, how it's allowed me to lead with clients and be able to truly impact, influence, and inspire people at a much deeper level, how it's allowed me to show up in relationship, right? Because I didn't actually believe I was deserving of romantic storybook relationship, because somebody sooner or later would leave me because I'm not good enough, that whole narrative. So what would I do? I would self-sabotage relationship. I would do all, right? It's impacted how I show up in every area of my life, because I know who I am. And most importantly, I know that I love myself without needing to crave it. I desire connection with others, but there's not a need for that, because most importantly, love is something that I already am, and love is something that I already provide for myself.
So you're somewhat of a unicorn in that most people that I would describe as seekers, most people that, are psychonauts, or they pursue meditation, or they look internally and they take these long walks and have these like real spiritual, introspection. Most of those people have it baked in. And a lot of people that I've met that are like you, or like you are describing, they just don't have the connector for that cable, man. Like they a lot of times don't have it. And so I know, because I can think of a few by name, I know people that are going to hear this and they're going to be like, yeah, but that's not me. I'm not, I don't like woo-woo. I don't like looking in the mirror. I don't like to dissect my feelings or look at trauma, even in the terms that you're describing them, which I think are totally fair. And so I don't know if there's much of a question, because you've spoken so eloquently already about this, but to that person who thinks that they're a fixed point in space, that doesn't think that shuts themselves off, forget psilocybin. I'm talking about sitting alone in a room without a phone for half an hour. Sure. Right. And so what would you tell that person?
That was me, even when I started doing the work, right? I was just on a call this morning with a client, Christine, and I was explaining to her my first couple months meeting with Tess. She's my somatic coach, and how I had so much ego and so much pride when I showed up there, because even the word therapy triggered something like, there's nothing wrong with me, right? That was the perception I had. And then I didn't know what somatic was. So all I heard was the word therapy. Mm-hmm. And then when I understood that somatic was about feelings, then my ego and pride came out even more. I was like, I already know what to do. I've done this with Tony Robbins. I've done this with Landmark. I've read this book. I've done this with John Maxwell. I've done this with, and I would start to rattle off all the things I knew. And so to the person who would feel that way, the first thing I would say is that was 100% me. For me, I was willing to open the door and explore, because I had to get honest with myself at some point and go, yes, I do know all those things conceptually. And yet, here I am about to lose another amazing relationship, because I'm showing up one way, and then all of a sudden I'm triggered and I'm throwing a 2-liter soda bottle across the freaking apartment, right? Yelling words that I would never want to hear my daughters have said to them by another man. And here I am, like, right? So I'm about to lose another relationship, and just so ashamed of who I am at my lowest moments. So that would be one thing. If you want to tie it into the achiever, succeed, and make money part, I could not break through 100K in earnings in a month, right? No matter how hard I worked and no matter how many strategies I tried. We hit 98K in earnings. We hit 93K, 92K, and I could not break 100K. And I went to all my business coaches, mentors, and I got all the strat and still could not break. I went on a walk with my somatic therapist, and she starts to ask what's going on in my body. And I said, holy shit. My dad, growing up pretty middle class, used to verbally kind of mock rich people. And how he would define rich people, the way my childhood brains remembers it, is people who made six figures. He'd be like, that guy makes six figures. You think, right? And so here my brain now is making a story that if my dad resents people who make six figures in a year, what is my dad going to think about me if I make six figures in a month? And here I am in my own subconscious and my own energetic state, self-sabotaging my ability to go over 100K. And I invested in coaches. I did all the mindset stuff. I worked harder and could not. Jason, it almost sounds unreal. The very next month, guess what happens? Break 100K. And have not fallen below that number in 36, almost 48 months now since that conversation. And so whether you're just like an achiever and the woo-woo stuff isn't you, right? That's a money example. That's a business achiever example of how all the stuff in the mind wasn't getting the job done. And once I was able to heal through, my dad will love me and be proud, and not just say it in my head, but feel it, because that's somatic work, feeling it in your body, not just knowing it, right? And here's a good example to recognize the difference. How many of you listening to this have ever done like an affirmation before, like, I am happy? And your brain's saying the right words and your body's like, shut up. No, you're not, right? That's somatic work. Because if the body doesn't match with the mind, you have a disconnect, right? And so somatic work, all it's doing is it's making sure to level up your emotional state with the mindset. And then there's magic to that. And so whether it's relationship that you care about, because I was about to lose and destroy another one of those, whether it's business or whether it's just your own peace and happiness, because I never believed I would be good enough. That's what I felt in my body. So even as I achieved, I would then get into this worry, superstitious, when's the other shoe going to drop emotional state. It can't stay this good forever, right? And I learned to work through that stuff as well. So those are just some examples of how, if I was that person showing up to somatic work, what I'd say to them. And I'd end that part with this. If you watch the show Billions, right? And I love that show. And if you watch the show Billions, there's a woman on staff for Bobby Axelrod, the billionaire in the show. There's a woman on staff named Wendy Rhodes. And Axe goes to Wendy for almost every big decision, every big breakthrough he needs to have, he goes to Wendy. Most people don't realize that Wendy is essentially a somatic therapist, right? The type of work you see Wendy do in that show is what somatic coaching is when I do somatic work. And so that kind of makes it more mainstream when you picture it that way. Instead of, I used to picture woo-woo work being like sitting like cross-legged at the top of a mountain, chanting and humming. And like, that's what I used to think woo-woo work was. But when I realized that the work I was doing with Tess was actually the same type of thing as I saw Bobby Axelrod do at Wendy Rhodes, it started to normalize it based on how I grew up.
There's two questions that I ask everybody that comes on the show, Michael, and I'd like to ask you those two questions now. Are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. The first question is, if you had access to unlimited financial capital, how would you profitably grow your current businesses?
If I had access to unlimited capital, how would I profitably right now? Yeah, good question. Three things come to mind. So you're talking like not just theoretically, like specifically maybe one of my businesses right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Or as many of them as you choose to discuss, but yeah, what would you do? What actions would you take?
Three come to mind right away. I would be able to use the unlimited capital to hire or been there, done that's. Right. I think there's times in business where you're developing your in-house team, and there's times where you can go like quote unquote overpay to recruit someone from another company, as an example, who's been there, done that, and taking the company to whatever the next level is. probably perfectly in line with what I understand you teach, without an A player team, without the right system. So the first thing is I would actually not worry about strategy. It's like the Dan Sullivan book, Who, Not How.
Yes.
Right. For those who like, I would first go use those resources to add the next key players to our team, the been there, done that's. Number two, I believe in this one company that I'm growing right now, we have a really efficient and optimized sales system. So all I would do is just use those dollars to multiply the audience that's now seeing that, whether it's Alex Hormozy style. And I think I've heard numbers like spend $70,000 a month to grow his audience and blah, 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 all those types of things. So I would grow the audience. I combined kind of 2 and 3 in how I was thinking about it, because the third one was going to be a specific strategy using ads and Instagram shout outs and stuff like that. But that really falls under number 2. So yeah, I would hire the A players, and then I would just 10x the audience that's seeing what we're offering, because I know that the sales systems underneath that are optimized and efficient already.
I love it. Number 2, if you had to give up all of the businesses you currently have or have had and start something totally new that you've never tried before, what do you think that might be?
I've thought about that a lot in the last year or two. We surpassed goals that I even had for this business. I used Inc. 5000, fastest growing, all these different things. And then I just shared about the breakdowns I had when I was turning 30. I'm turning 40 now in a year and a half, 2 years, in 2024. Yeah, thank you. And I think I was just doing a lot of reflecting on that exact question. And I don't have an exact answer, but where I land right now, where I believe an answer was now, if I just got rid of or threw away or all the businesses I have today and I had to go start something different in a different industry, I would want to learn and or start a business in finance and or real estate investing, some version or a combination of the two. And the reason I say that is the lesson that has been coming through for me as of late is that I think it's a Warren Buffett concept, and that is the vehicle in which you're in will still have a huge determining factor of the level of wealth you build, right? You could be the hardest worker, but the ceiling of the industry you're in is a 8-figure business or a 9-figure business or a 10-figure business or a whatever. And so when I think of finance and real estate, I just think the ceiling is bigger than maybe the industry that I'm in right now. And I think that's one of the reasons that, and it's aligned with things I enjoy and love too. Why that's an industry I think I would start instead or get into if that were the case. And I'll close with this to that, because I've explored before. I've gotten into times where I'm like, man, I really wish I got into SaaS and tech and stuff like that, because you see all the unicorn. And then I slowed down with myself and I'm like, I have no gifts. I have no talents in that world. Like, yeah, I could chase the billions, but without the tools to create it, it wouldn't happen anyways. I think real estate and finance, I have the tools and skills to still pair with that. And it's a high enough ceiling that would excite me.
Yeah. The 2 words that echo in my brain all the time are undeniable and scale. And you, sir, are undeniable. And you're right, that would create scale. So I think that's a brilliantly said answer. Michael, you're an unbelievable human being. You're inspiration, both in the systems that you have been able to build, as well as the way that you've been able to create harmony in your own personal life. I am so thankful that you took the time today to come and speak to our audience. What are your final thoughts for them, and how can they get a hold of you? Because they certainly will try.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It genuinely was a pleasure of mine. I really enjoyed today's conversation. So I want to thank you first and foremost, just for the questions, your presence, your energy, and how you show up to host. I've been on tons of these. And so first, thank you to you. People can follow me, right? Social media is a simple way. Instagram, it's just Mike 2_Chu, CHU. If you do run some sort of coaching course or online business, we have tons of free resources. One of the ones I love to give people that are out of business, that are already multiple 6, but they want to go to 7 or 8. You could go to www.champdev.com/free, I believe is the link. And you can get free resources and trainings on our LTV method, which is how we help 6- and 7-figure businesses unlock $100,000 to $1 million in what we call hidden pockets of revenue that's just pure profit.
Mm.
So that's a second way. And then if you're specifically in the fitness space online, we have a Facebook group called 7-Figure Fit Pro, which is for nutritionists, health coaches, fitness trainers online. It's a free community with free trainings every week and stuff like that. You can find the free Facebook group called 7-Figure Fit Pro.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time. Those links will be in the show notes below, guys.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.